The room fell completely silent when my oldest son pushed the envelope back across the table and said, "If that's the price of inheriting your money, you can keep every penny." I wasn't expecting those words. Not because they hurt, because they revealed everything. Across from him, my daughter stared at the envelope as though it contained a winning lottery ticket. My youngest son leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for someone else to speak first. The attorney beside me quietly removed his glasses, sensing that this family meeting had just become something far bigger than a discussion about my estate. Outside the conference room window, rain tapped steadily against the glass. Inside, 30 years of parenting were being measured in a few impossible decisions. I had spent my entire adult life building a successful construction company from nothing. Every late night, every missed vacation, every aching muscle had become the fortune sitting in that lawyer's office. People assumed dividing money among children should be simple. It isn't, because money doesn't reveal character. It exposes it. That envelope wasn't a contract. It wasn't a legal document. It contained one simple request. One final chance. One last opportunity for each of my children to show me exactly who they had become before I signed my will. What happened over the following 6 weeks changed our family forever. Looking back, I realized the inheritance was never really the problem. The cracks had been forming for years. Small comments, little expectations, unspoken resentments. Each holiday gathering carried invisible tension that everyone pretended not to notice. I kept telling myself they were just growing pains, that siblings naturally drift apart, that adulthood would eventually mature them. Instead, success had quietly transformed my children into strangers who measured love in dollars, favors, and future promises. By the time I finally understood what was happening, one of my children had already decided my funeral would simply be another business opportunity. That realization forced me to create the test. Not to decide who deserved my money, but to discover who still deserved my trust. My name is Richard Lawson. I'm 72 years old, widowed, and the founder of Lawson Commercial Builders in Columbus, Ohio. My wife Diane and I started our company with one pickup truck, 2 borrowed ladders, and enough determination to survive when common sense told us we should quit. She handled the books. I handled construction. For 43 years, we built office buildings, schools, libraries, and community centers throughout central Ohio. When Diane passed away from pancreatic cancer 6 years ago, I sold most of the company to my longtime management team and kept a minority share that still provided more income than I could ever spend. Financially, I was comfortable. Emotionally, I wasn't. Losing Diane felt like someone had removed the foundation beneath my life. She had always understood people better than I did. Whenever one of the kids argued or struggled, she'd quietly pull me aside. "Richard," she'd say, "don't solve their problems too quickly. Sometimes they need to discover who they are." I wish I had listened more carefully. We had 3 children. Our oldest, Michael, was 46. He had become a successful financial advisor, lived in a beautiful neighborhood, and rarely asked anyone for help. His wife, Angela, taught high school English, and together they raised 2 thoughtful teenagers. Michael appeared responsible, reliable, organized. But over the years, he'd become increasingly distant, as though every conversation had been scheduled between meetings. Then there was our daughter, Jennifer, 43, bright, funny, creative. She had once dreamed of opening an art gallery, but eventually settled into managing an upscale furniture store. Jennifer always claimed life had treated everyone else better than her. Nothing was ever entirely her fault. Her divorce had been her ex-husband's fault. Her financial struggles were caused by bad timing. Her career disappointments resulted from unfair bosses. She loved me deeply, I believe, but she also viewed me as the solution to problems she hadn't created. Our youngest was Daniel, 39, easygoing, charming, the kind of person who could make friends anywhere. He bounced between business ideas every few years, coffee shops, online stores, real estate, a brewery that lasted 9 months. Each venture failed for a different reason. Each failure came with another explanation. Daniel never directly asked me for money. Instead, he'd say things like, "Dad, if I just had a little breathing room," or "Investors don't understand the vision." I'd helped him more than once, probably more than I should have. After Diane died, Sunday dinners became my anchor. Every other week, the whole family came to my house. The grandchildren laughed in the backyard. The smell of roast chicken filled the kitchen. For a few hours, everything felt almost normal. But Diane had been the glue. Without her, I slowly began noticing things I'd overlooked for years. Jennifer always asked subtle questions about my finances. "Dad, have you updated your retirement accounts? Do you still own part of the company? You've probably got everything organized, right?" Daniel joked constantly about someday inheriting my old lake house. Michael usually changed the subject whenever money came up. At first, I admired that. Later, I wondered if he simply didn't want conflict. Then came the Sunday dinner that changed everything. Jennifer casually looked around my dining room and laughed. You know, one day we'll probably have to argue over all this. Everyone chuckled, everyone except me. Because Daniel immediately answered, "Depends on what Dad leaves each of us." The room went quiet for only a second. Then someone changed the subject. But I noticed something. Nobody said, "Hopefully that's many years away." Nobody said, "Don't talk like that." Instead, they started discussing inheritance as though I weren't sitting 3 feet away, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like their father. I felt like an estate waiting to be divided. That night, after everyone left, I walked through my empty house and stood in front of Diane's photograph. "I think they're forgetting something," I whispered. In the picture, she smiled the same patient smile she'd worn for decades, almost as if she already knew what I was finally beginning to understand. And that was the moment I decided that before I signed my final will, my children would have to pass one last test. The morning after I decided to test my children, I drove to the cemetery. I wasn't looking for answers. I just missed talking to Diane. I stood in front of her headstone with a cup of coffee in my hand, something we used to share every Saturday morning. "I don't know if I'm being unfair," I said quietly. "Maybe they're just comfortable talking about money because they know I'm prepared." The wind rustled the oak trees overhead. Then I remembered something she'd once told me after Michael was caught lying about breaking a neighbor's window when he was 12. "Character isn't measured by what people say when everything is easy," she'd said. "It's measured by what they do when something valuable is within reach." That sentence stayed with me all day. Maybe the inheritance wasn't the valuable thing. Maybe the opportunity was. Small requests. I didn't tell my children about the test immediately. Instead, I watched. Really watched. Over the next month, I invited each of them to spend time with me separately. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Michael came over one Saturday morning to help me replace a leaking faucet. "You could have hired somebody," he said as we worked under the sink. "I know. You've earned the right to stop fixing everything yourself." I smiled. "I enjoy staying useful," he laughed. "You've always been stubborn." For 3 hours, we worked around the house. Not once did he mention my finances. Not once did he ask about my will. When we finished, he hugged me. "Call me if you need anything." Simple. No agenda. Just his time. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. Jennifer's visit felt different almost immediately. She arrived carrying expensive pastries and hugged me tightly. "You look tired, Dad." "I slept fine. I just worry about you living here alone." We chatted over coffee for about 20 minutes before she casually looked around the living room. "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" "Not really. This house is huge. It feels like home." She nodded thoughtfully. "I just hate the idea of all this becoming difficult later." I looked at her. "Difficult for who?" She hesitated. "You know, for us." There it was. Not cruel, not even intentional, but revealing. She wasn't thinking about what leaving my home would mean to me. She was already imagining what it would mean for everyone else. Before leaving, she opened one of my desk drawers without asking. "I was looking for a pen," she explained. There were pens sitting on the coffee table. I said nothing. Daniel visited the following weekend. He arrived 45 minutes late. Traffic. There had been no traffic. After lunch, he wandered into my garage. "I forgot how much stuff you've got." 40 years of collecting tools. He picked up an antique woodworking plane. "Bet this is worth something." "It belonged to your grandfather." He turned it over in his hands. "You keeping an inventory of all this?" I laughed. "Why?" "Insurance." But something about the way he scanned the shelves made me uncomfortable, like he wasn't seeing memories. He was seeing price tags. Family gatherings changed. The next Sunday dinner brought even more surprises. Jennifer complimented my china cabinet. "I've always loved this piece." Daniel grinned. "I called it years ago." "What?" "The cabinet," Jennifer laughed. "No fair. I already picked that." My granddaughter Emily looked confused. "Picked what?" "The furniture we'll inherit someday," Daniel joked. Emily frowned. "Grandpa's sitting right there." The room became awkwardly quiet. Angela gently changed the conversation. But I couldn't stop thinking about Emily's face. She was 16. Even she understood something the adults seemed to forget. You don't divide someone's belongings while they're still alive. After dinner, Michael stayed behind to help with the dishes. "I've noticed something," I said. He sighed before I even finished. "So have I." "They've changed." He looked down into the sink. "I don't think they even realize they're doing it." "You've noticed?" "For a while." "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged. "I figured you'd handle it when you were ready." That answer lingered with me. He wasn't avoiding the issue. He was respecting that it was mine to address. The pressure increases. A week later, Jennifer called. "Hey, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart. I wanted your opinion." "About what?" "I'm thinking of buying a condo." "That's exciting." "It is, except I may need a larger down payment." I waited. I wasn't asking for money. I know. But if you happen to be planning early inheritance gifts. There it was. The sentence hung in the air. "I haven't made any decisions like that." "Oh." Her voice immediately cooled. "I just thought it might make sense for tax purposes." Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But the timing bothered me. Not because she asked. Because she assumed my money already belonged, at least partly, to her. 3 days later, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. "I've got an incredible opportunity." I nearly laughed. I'd heard that sentence dozens of times. "This one's different." "What is it?" "A commercial property." He spread blueprints across my dining room table. "If I can move quickly." "How much?" He looked embarrassed. 200,000. I stared at him. "Daniel, I'd pay you back." "You still owe me from the brewery." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know." "When?" "I'm getting there." "No." His smile disappeared. "So that's it?" "That's it." He packed up his papers without another word. Before leaving, he said something that stuck with me. "I just thought family helped family." The front door closed. I stood alone in the hallway thinking about those words. Family does help family. But somewhere along the way, helping had quietly become expected instead of appreciated. The attorney's suggestion. A few days later, I met with my estate attorney, Susan. She'd represented Diane and me for nearly 20 years. After reviewing my assets, she asked a simple question. "Have you decided how you'd like everything divided?" I thought I had. "And now?" "I'm not sure." She leaned back. Something changed. "My children." She nodded patiently. "I've seen this before. I don't want to punish anyone. You don't have to. I just want to know who they really are." Susan smiled. "Then don't test their love." "What do you mean?" "Money can confuse love." She folded her hands. "Test their priorities." The sentence landed like a stone. Not their affection, not their loyalty, their priorities. By the end of the meeting, we'd designed something remarkably simple. Each of my children would receive the exact same sealed envelope. Inside would be one request. No tricks, no impossible demands, no competition, just one decision that would tell me everything I needed to know. The inheritance would remain exactly the same, for now, but depending on what each child chose to do with that request, the final version of my will might look very different. And none of them had the slightest idea that the real test hadn't even begun. A week later, I invited all 3 of my children to my house for Sunday dinner. There was nothing unusual about the invitation. We had gathered around that same oak dining table for years. Only this time, there were 3 identical ivory envelopes waiting beside each dinner plate. They noticed them immediately. Jennifer smiled. "What's this? Birthday presents?" Daniel reached for his before anyone else. Michael left his untouched. "Open them after dessert," I said. No one asked another question. For the rest of the meal, conversation felt strangely forced. My grandchildren talked about school and summer plans. Angela asked if anyone wanted more mashed potatoes. Jennifer laughed a little too loudly at stories that weren't particularly funny. Every few minutes, someone's eyes drifted toward the envelopes. I realized then that curiosity can be louder than conversation. The letter. After coffee, I nodded toward the table. "You can open them now." The letters were identical. "My dear children, I've been thinking about the legacy your mother and I hope to leave behind. Before I finalize my will, I have one request. For the next 6 weeks, each of you will spend one afternoon every week with me. No business, no discussions about money, no requests for favors, just time together. At the end of those 6 weeks, write me one letter telling me what you learned, not about my estate but about me. Whether you accept this is entirely your choice. Love, Dad." Silence settled over the room. Jennifer blinked twice. "That's it?" "That's it," Daniel laughed. "I thought this was going to be something dramatic." "It doesn't seem difficult," Michael said quietly. "It isn't supposed to be." Jennifer folded the letter carefully. "So, this has something to do with your will?" I looked directly at her. "It has to do with knowing my children." No one spoke after that. When everyone left, I watched their cars disappear down the street. I wondered which of them had understood the assignment, and which had only heard the word will. Week 1. Michael arrived the following Wednesday carrying 2 fishing poles. "I figured we haven't gone fishing in 20 years. We haven't. We spent 4 hours on the lake. We barely caught anything. Mostly we talked, about his kids, about Diane, about how difficult it had been watching me grieve after losing my wife. At one point he said quietly, "I never knew how to help you." "You helped just by being here." He looked away toward the water. "I should have come around more." There wasn't an excuse in his voice, only regret. That mattered. Jennifer came on Friday. She brought lunch from my favorite deli. For the first hour, things felt wonderful. We looked through old family photographs. She laughed at hairstyles from the 80s. She cried when she found pictures of her mother teaching her to bake pies. Then her phone rang. She answered immediately. "I'll only be a minute." That minute became 23. When she returned, she apologized. "Work crisis." I nodded. As we resumed looking through albums, she suddenly stopped at a picture of our old beach house. "I forgot you sold that property." "I did." "How much did it go for?" The question felt strangely out of place. "Enough." She laughed awkwardly. "I was just curious." 5 minutes later, she asked another. "So the company sale, was that structured over several years?" I closed the photo album. "What do you remember about that vacation?" She looked surprised. "The beach house? The picture." She stared at it. "I don't know." I smiled gently. "I remember your mother teaching you to float in the ocean." Jennifer looked down. For the rest of the afternoon, she asked no more financial questions. But the damage had already been done. Daniel canceled. "I've got a client meeting." "No problem." The next week he canceled again. Then again. Each time there was another explanation. Investor, emergency, travel, opportunity. Finally, on the 4th attempt, he arrived nearly 2 hours late. "I'm sorry." "It's all right." "No, really." We walked through the garden together. Within 15 minutes he was discussing commercial real estate again. I wasn't asking for money. I know. But imagine if someone inherited enough capital. I stopped walking. "Daniel." "What?" "This afternoon isn't about investments." He sighed. "I know." But 15 minutes later, he brought it up again. The grandchildren. Unexpectedly, the most meaningful moments came from the youngest members of the family. One afternoon, Emily asked if she could visit while Michael was working. She helped me weed the garden. Halfway through, she asked, "Grandpa?" "Yes?" "Are Mom and Uncle Daniel upset about something?" "What makes you think that?" "They always seem nervous when they come here now." Children notice everything. "They're adults," I said carefully. "They're figuring some things out." She nodded. Then she said something that nearly broke my heart. "I hope nobody makes you feel like you're only important because of your money." I stopped pulling weeds. "What made you say that?" She shrugged. "Because when Grandma was alive, everyone talked about family." She looked at me. "Now everyone talks about houses." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for saying that." She smiled. "I just wanted you to know I'd still come over even if you lived in an apartment." After she left, I sat alone on the porch for almost an hour. No inheritance, no test, no agenda, just unconditional love. Exactly what I'd been searching for. The letters begin. By week 5, Michael handed me a handwritten envelope. "I know we're supposed to wait. I'll read it later. It isn't about the inheritance." That evening I opened it. The first sentence read, "I spent so much time becoming successful that I forgot my father was growing older while I was busy." I had to stop reading, not because it was sad, because it was honest. Jennifer hadn't started hers. "I'll write it at the end." Daniel joked that he'd probably use artificial intelligence to write his. I hate writing. I laughed politely. But inside, something shifted, not because of the joke, because effort tells its own story. The dinner that changed everything. With 1 week remaining, Jennifer invited everyone to dinner at her house. Halfway through the meal, she raised her glass. "I think Dad deserves a toast." Everyone smiled. "To Dad." "To Dad," she continued. "You've worked harder than anyone I know." "Thank you." "And whatever you decide to do with your estate," she paused, "I hope you remember who was always there for you." The room froze. Michael slowly lowered his fork. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Angela stared at her plate. I asked calmly, "What do you mean?" Jennifer laughed nervously. "Oh, nothing." "No." I kept my voice gentle. "What did you mean?" She hesitated. "I just mean, some people have made more effort lately than others." Michael looked directly at her. "You mean because Dad asked us to spend time with him?" "I didn't say that." "You implied it." I've rearranged my entire schedule, Michael nodded. So have I. Daniel suddenly spoke. This is ridiculous. No, Michael answered quietly. What's ridiculous is keeping score. The grandchildren had stopped eating. No one touched their food. Jennifer finally pushed her chair back. I think we're all pretending. Pretending about what? I asked. That this isn't about the inheritance. The words landed like a hammer. She looked around the table. Because obviously it is. For the first time in my life, I looked at my own children and realized that the test was no longer revealing who loved me. It was revealing who believed love had to be earned with money. And I knew the final family meeting the following week would change everything.